Hello. I think you all know, but I'm Leslie Kaufman, the EVP at the Iowa Statewide Association. And with me today is Ethan Hohenadel, our Director of Policy and Advocacy. The association is engaging in strategic discussions to develop an advocacy framework to help guide our policy development processes and guide the positions and the priorities that we assign to those positions for our advocacy efforts. This is a grassroots initiative. We kicked it off during the summer managers and board presidents meeting and had two groups where we discussed issues and items and really had what would be kind of a strategic planning discussion on the core values, essentially what could be our core policy analysis values for our advocacy efforts. Through those discussions and then further discussions with the IAEC board, the board commissioned us to put together a visual of how a draft framework could come together. And we took that on the road with us last week, as many of you know, during district meetings. And as a follow-up to that, we have had one minor change that we made to the framework. We inserted economic development and red leg in as an example of where that item could be analyzed under the pillar that relates to our key values and our co-op principles and fairness. But we wanted to just give a little bit of an overview here of how the framework could work in a real life situation as a point of illustration for those that maybe wanted to review again after district meetings or were unable to attend district meetings. This is a framework that we have put out to the membership. We sent it out to managers, board presidents, and those that attended district meetings for another round of input. So as you look at it, talk amongst yourselves at your co-op board meetings, at your co-op meetings with your key employees on how you see issues fitting through here and some of the core values that it represents. And we really want it to be a reflective tool of where our Iowa Electric Cooperative membership stakes out their values for analyzing policy matters. And so with that, we have asked that members get back to us by September 2nd, and we'll take the information that we garner to the Government Relations Committee and look to them for guidance. We expect them to have some type of a recommendation then that would go to the IAEC board and for the board to consider that. And the hope is to have this tool up and running and functional for the analysis that we would do on issues ahead of and during the 2026 legislative session here in Iowa. So that's kind of a quick overview. We've also provided a slide deck with the email that has some more background information, but certainly after this video and after you've looked at that information, if you do have any questions on the process or comments on the framework or just overall questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to either myself or Ethan. And now I'm going to turn it over to Ethan to give a real life example of how this framework could work to help better illustrate how we would be using it moving forward if we've adopted it. So.
Well, thanks, Leslie. And so during district meetings, we walked through a similar example, and a lot of people thought it was valuable to really understand how we will use this framework if adopted. So the example we gave was the third-party solar bill, or sometimes called the community solar bill, that came through the legislature last session. And so for those who are unfamiliar with that bill, what it would have done is allowed a third-party developer to come in and install a large solar field and then sell subscriptions to individual consumers at the end of the line. So therefore bypassing the utility and getting electricity delivered to their residents through these community solar developers. And then the utility would then act as a backup or a secondary energy source for when the solar wasn't producing. It also had provisions on net metering and compensating the third-party developer for generation back onto the grid at retail rates, a lot of unsavory provisions. So when we look at that issue and kind of run it through this framework, starting there on the left at safety, this could create a fairly large safety issue. If a third party is allowed to install solar and sell directly to consumers, there's going to be large amounts of energy put onto your system and being sold to your members that is not cooperative owned. And so as you have linemen out working in the field, trying to either restore power or upgrade transmission line or distribution lines, you name it, we don't know whether these fields would have been put together correctly. Were they installed and inspected correctly? Were they using quality materials? Were the inverters, those kinds of things UL listed? all kinds of potential risks when you have your line crews or even your members out working around electricity where there might be backfeed issues, that kind of stuff. So because there would be lack of oversight of these entities and lack of control for the cooperative, you could have significant safety problems for both your members as well as your employees. We go to the next one on cooperative values and fairness. And that one's a little more tricky because you'll have a significant portion of your membership that doesn't participate, but could be impacted because of cost shifts. So they may have unfair costs associated with their bills because they're not participating, but yet they're having to subsidize the group. But you probably have some members that want to participate in solar, but for one reason or another can't install it on their own property, whether their roof faces the wrong direction, their property isn't flat or has a lot of wooded areas, and so it's hard to install solar. So they want to put on their own solar, but are struggling to do so because of things outside their control. And so you might have some members that benefit from that kind of install, and even to an extent where they want to put these facilities. You may have members that have land that is really, really good for solar, and instead of just putting in their own solar, they want to put in a large amount of solar and help their neighbors and so forth be able to get solar energy. So you could have some members benefit, but most likely you're going to have a lot more members that have a negative consequence to them. And so while this one probably still falls in the negative category, it's not quite as strong as safety. We move next to governance and structure, which is to preserve the cooperative business model. Well, there's some attacks with this kind of issue where they have called them cooperative solar farms or something similar, trying to use the cooperative business model to prop them up, even though they don't really act like a cooperative. And so that type of attack on the cooperative business model or trying to use it in a way that's not really conducive to cooperatives and that doesn't really uphold the 7 cooperative principles, it makes the cooperative business model a little weaker, a little tougher to defend. You get into the financial for the 4th category. We talked about it a little bit before, and so some of these overlap a little bit, but this type of situation causes a huge cost shift. And so you have a lot of members paying for additional rates because the cooperative would be required to pay out at retail for that energy. That money has to come from somewhere. And so that puts upward pressure on rates. And so you have economic impacts to all these additional members. Secondarily, you do resource planning. And so when you're looking at either distribution, what your demand is going to be and setting your rates on that demand, or if you're at the G&T level, you're planning for resources available and where you're purchasing from, what kind of contracts you need to have in place, or what you're going to have to buy from the market, all those types of considerations. Now you have a third party coming in that could be installing significant amount of power in various pockets that now you have to manage. And so not only are you buying additional power from them because you're required by law, you also now have to get that power other places. And so you may have transmission upgrades, may have distribution upgrades, all kinds of additional costs that you may be incurring that you hadn't planned on. And so there may be a financial impact to not only your membership, but then the cooperative itself. And then finally, on the operational side, your ability to deliver safe, reliable, and affordable power is going to be impacted by these types of installs. We already talked about the safety issues, which kind of get into the operational, but then it complicates things. So as you have linemen out working on the lines, either from a storm restoration, you're building new distribution lines, so forth. Now there's extra steps they have to take to make sure that there's no backfeeds, that there's no issues. On the same side, as you're setting up your work plan for the next 10 years on where you're going to be building out new distribution lines, where your expansions are, what needs to be replaced, these types of projects now would be impacting that plan because you may have to upgrade lines that you hadn't intended to, but now you have to go out there and get those upgraded in order to make sure that you can get the electricity from one of those fields to where it can be used. So just to kind of recap, when we look across the board, safety is a big no. Cooperative fairness is still kind of a no, but a little bit less so. And then governance, financial, and operational are all strong no's. So looking through this analysis, if we're looking at that bill from a statewide, we would take that analysis and say it's a pretty strong no across the board, that there's nothing good in this bill for us. It not only is it not anything good, we don't see any way of making it better and making it palatable so that we could be okay with this. And so we would take that then to the GR committee during the ahead of session and as we're looking at establishing our positions on these types of issues and say, this is a pretty strong no for us. We think under this analysis that we would be a no. And then we could set the position and prioritization of figuring out what type of resources can the IAEC dedicate to the cause to get this bill off the floor, whether that means statewide staff time, our contract lobbyist staff time, what the reputational risk for cooperatives, any political capital we're spending, those kinds of things. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Leslie, see if she's got anything additional to add.
Thank you, Ethan. And as you kind of wrapped up there and talked about going to the GR committee, I think a good point to emphasize is this is a tool that can be used and is planned to be used within the existing structures that we have for our policy development process currently within the association. So it's a tool that would be instructive for the GR committee, the IAEC staff, the board, and work in with the existing processes. Also, I wanted to emphasize too that this is a visual. This framework that you're looking at is a visual that encompasses what grassroots cooperative leaders have said are important. Through the discussions that we've had with cooperative members, it's built off of your input and grassroots input and framed around the concerns that our IAEC member leaders have said are important to cooperatives across Iowa. So it really is the members' framework embodied in this tool. And we certainly want to emphasize that. Again, just a reminder that what you're looking at is a discussion draft, and member input continues to be sought in this process. We've had the opportunities, as we've discussed, to have multiple discussions with groups of members, but continue to want to provide additional opportunities for answering questions from members or taking comments from members. And again, Ethan and I are pleased to handle any phone call or email question, or if you need to just walk through a little more in depth on the phone, please do. Again, the example that Ethan just walked through was, based on 2025 legislation. That doesn't mean that an analysis moving forward under a different bill might not have a little different nuance, but it's a perfect example, I think, and hopefully that illustration helps you understand better how this could be utilized moving forward. So again, we hope to hear back from many of you by September 2nd. And again, if we can provide any other additional information, please reach out to us. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.